second impeachment trial against former U.S. President Donald Trump is set to begin this Tuesday. In Haiti, protesters clashed with police in the nation's capital after President Moise refused to step down. And in Myanmar's capital, gunshots were reported shortly after police used water cannons on protesters. Hello and welcome to teleSUR English. I am Estefania Bravo from the headquarters of Quito in Ecuador. This is From the South. The second impeachment trial against the former President Donald Trump begins this Tuesday after Senate leaders came to a bipartisan agreement on the structure and the timing of the process. Trump's second impeachment trial is set up to be carried out with a sense of urgency by Democrats who want to hold him accountable for the violent Capitol siege and also get to work on other important Biden policies, and Republicans who want it over as quickly as possible. The trial begins with a debate and vote on whether it's constitutional to prosecute the former president. Opening arguments will begin on Wednesday at noon with up to 16 hours per side for presentation. The proceedings are expected to diverge from the lengthy, complicated trial that resulted in Trump's acquittal a year ago on charges that he privately pressured Ukraine to dig up dirt on his Democratic rival and now President Joe Biden. The U.S. Senate has confirmed President Joe Biden's nominee for Secretary of Veteran Affairs, Dennis McDonough, by a vote of 87-7. McDonough has never served in the military but is a former Deputy National Security Advisor and was President Barack Obama's Chief of Staff during his second term.
Dennis McDonough has demonstrated that he is unequivocally the man for this job. And to be clear, this is not an easy job. But Dennis is used to making tough calls. He has shown an exemplary commitment to public service and a strong willingness to do right by those who've worn the uniform and sacrificed on behalf of our liberties. As White House Chief of Staff, he quickly earned a reputation for getting the job done, working across federal agencies and finding common ground. For the last 20 years, he's played a key role in many decisions surrounding sending our military men and women to war, and knows that taking care of these folks when they return home is a cost of war and a shared responsibility.
And during a virtual meeting of the first 24/7 coronavirus vaccination site in Arizona, U.S. President Joe Biden said he's optimistic that at least 300 million people will be vaccinated before the summer.
And this is a kind of partnership between the federal and state governments that I think in the private sector it help us vaccinate more people more quickly and to get ahead of this virus instead of behind it. And we're optimistic that we have enough, we'll have enough of the vaccine in the pipeline to be able to provide shots for over, including double shots for over 300 million people before we get through the summer. At least that's our hope.
World Health Organization Chief Scientist Soumya Swaminathan said China's plans to provide 10 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines to COVAX is encouraging.
We need as many good vaccines, safe and efficacious vaccines as possible. China has several vaccines under development, and we are talking we are speaking with all of them. And we are also looking at the dossiers for Sinopharm and Sinovac. And the team is in China, as Dr. Simao mentioned. And we've also heard from them that they would be willing to discuss with the COVAX facility provision initially of 10 million doses over the next few months. So we're very encouraged by that.
On Tuesday, China's Macau Special Administrative Region rolled out its COVID-19 vaccination program using mainland-made vaccines, with Macau's chief executive, Ho Yat-seng, being the first one to receive the vaccine. Other senior government officials and frontline health workers were also inoculated, and residents in Macau can register for injections starting on Tuesday at noon. According to local health authority, health personnel, police, and firefighters will get top priority for the vaccine, followed followed by public transport drivers, food processing workers, and workers in elderly care homes. Macau's government said that permanent residents in the city, as well as migrant workers, non-local students, would get the vaccine free of charge. The special administrative region has not recorded any local infection for more than 300 days.
Thanks to the strong support from the central authorities, now we say that Macau can receive the 500,000 doses of vaccines we ordered earlier. We have received 100,000 doses and 400,000 more will arrive by the end of this month. The vaccines can cover up our needs as Macau is a relatively small city, and this means great support for us. Secondly, in terms of the efficacy after vaccination, it will add a shield to protect us, making us healthier as Macau is already a low-risk area.
In Iran, authorities launched on Tuesday a coronavirus inoculation campaign among healthcare professionals who were recently in the Sputnik V vaccines. At a ceremony marking the start of the campaign, the country's health minister, Sayed Namaki, said the vaccination would be carried out simultaneously in more than 600 medical centers across the country. According to local media, a total of 2 million Russian vaccines will arrive in Iran in February and March. In December, Iran began testing an Iranian-made vaccine in humans and said it expects to distribute it in the spring. The country is also working on a joint vaccine with Cuba. To date, Iran registered more than 1.4 million COVID-19 cases and nearly 59,000 deaths.
Our domestically made vaccine would not be ready until spring, and because of that, we had to vaccinate vulnerable groups. We attempt to supply vaccines from reliable sources in the world whose vaccines had firstly passed the clinical trial stage on humans in 3 phases, and secondly, had definitely been started to be used for vaccination in a number of credible countries. One of the sources that we have chosen from and started to inject today is the Sputnik V vaccine, made by Russia's Gamaleya Research Institute of Epidemiology and Microbiology. Despite widespread international pressure, the Islamic Republic of Iran has managed to swim in the ocean of coronavirus with tied-up hands. In this outbreak period, our borders had been closed off for imports of medical needs from abroad, and the harshest sanctions were imposed on us, and our people were deprived of the most basic things.
The United Nations Food Agency announced it has agreed to a deal with Ethiopia to expand access for aid workers and scale up operations in the conflict-hit northern Tigray region. UN officials have repeatedly complained of the lack of humanitarian access to the northern region as fears grow of a humanitarian disaster, especially starvation. According to the World Food Program chief, David Beasley, the Central Ethiopian government and the agency have agreed on concrete steps to expand access and noted that 20,000 tons of food would be transported to 1.3 million people. The Tigray region has been largely cut off to NGOs and the media. In December, a UN team visiting refugees in the region was shot at by government forces. This Tuesday, protesters clashed with police in Haiti's capital, Port-au-Prince, after the country's president refused to step down at the end of his 5-year term. Police used tear gas and fired guns at protesters in the streets of the capital, who retaliated by throwing stones and using slings. The country's opposition leaders and their supporters have claimed that President Jovenel Moise's 5-year term has expired and demanded that he step down on February 7th. Instead, on that date, Moise announced that authorities had arrested 23 people accused of plotting an alleged coup to kill him and overthrow his government. Those arrested included a high-ranking police official and a Supreme Court judge who was favored in by the opposition. Protesters demand better living conditions, an end to corruption, and a solution to the problem of kidnapping for ransom, which affects the rich and poor alike. Inequitable vote counting of the general elections of February 7th continues. According to the latest report released by the electoral body, Andres Arauz is leading the vote intention with 32.02% of the votes, followed by the representative of the Pachacutic Party, Yacu Perez, with 20.13%, and Guillermo Lasso with 19.49%. So far, the electoral body computer center has computed 98% of the votes. A runoff between Arauz and either Yacu Perez or Guillermo Lasso is set to take place on April 11th. The U.S. prosecutors are investigating Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez for alleged participation in the narcotics trade. Prosecutors have accused the president of using Honduran law enforcement and military officials to protect drug traffickers as part of an alleged plan to use drug trafficking to help assert power and control in the military. Last month, the prosecutors claimed that in 2013, Hernandez accepted millions of dollars in drug trafficking proceeds and promised drug traffickers protection from law enforcement and extradition to the United States in exchange. The Honduran government has not responded to the criminal charges, and the president has repeatedly denied any ties to drug cartels. The InterAmerican Court of Human Rights began a hearing to study the lawsuit filed against the Colombian state for the genocide of members of the Patriotic Union Party. The virtual hearing will be held over 5 days to hear from members of the Patriotic Union. The lawsuit, filed in 1993, accuses the Colombian state of being involved in the murder and the violation of the human rights of at least 6,000 party members, as well as violating freedom of thought and expression. The violent acts against members of the party began in 1984 and continued for 20 years. Brazilian state-led oil company Petrobras is negotiating the sale of the Landulfo Alves refinery in Bahia State to Abu Dhabi's Mubadala investment for $1.65 billion in the first of what is expected to be 8 refinery sales by the end of 2021. The sale is still pending approval from corporate bodies, and Petrobras did not say when the deal could close. If the sale goes through, it would make the Landulfo Alves the first major Brazilian refinery to be owned by a non-state player. The deal represents a turning point for the country and officially ends Petrobras' monopoly in the sector, posing the threat of increased privatization. Petrobras currently operates 98% of Brazil's refining capacity, but that total will drop to about 50% after the company completes the sale of 8 of its 13 refineries by the end of 2021. On Tuesday, apparent gunshots were heard in Myanmar's capital shortly after police used water cannons on protesters for a second successive day. Reports said the shots sounded like those made by crowd control equipment that fire rubber bullets. It was not immediately clear whether live rounds were also fired. Protesters collected castings from the roadway as well as small pebbles that believe the police might also be using to target them. There were several injuries reported. The demonstrators were protesting against last week's military takeover that seized power from the government of Aung San Suu Kyi. And staying in Myanmar, protesters opposing the military takeover marched in Yangon on Tuesday, carrying flags, placards, and chanting slogans as police watched on. No violence was reported in Yangon, the country's biggest city, where thousands of people have been demonstrating since Saturday despite a heightened security presence. In other parts of Myanmar, police cracked down on demonstrators, firing warning shots and shooting water cannons to disperse crowds that took to the streets again on Tuesday in defiance of rules making protests illegal. The decrees issued on Monday night for some areas of Yangon and Madeline banned rallies and gatherings of more than 5 people, along with motorized processions, while almost imposing an 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. curfew. In northern India, hundreds of rescue workers continue to search mud-filled ravines and valleys for survivors after part of a Himalayan glacier broke off. The incident unleashed a devastating flood that has left at least 31 people dead and 165 missing. One of the rescue efforts is focused on a tunnel at a hydroelectric power plant where more than 36 workers have been out of contact since the flood occurred on Sunday. Scientists have gone to the site to investigate what caused the break and the flood. Experts say climate change may be to blame since warming temperatures are shrinking glaciers and making them unstable worldwide. The floodwater, mud, and boulders rode down the mountain along the Alagdana and Dalinga rivers, breaking dams, sweeping away bridges, and forcing the evacuation of many villages.
When we are extricating the mud, it is coming again and again. It's very heavy flow of mud inside the tunnel. So it's a very big challenge, but we are trying our best and with full strength. It's very difficult to predict that how much time it will take. We are trying, all the agencies, we are trying our best to do as far as possible, and we are very hopeful that we will finish the work well in time. We always hope for the best, and we will be very happy, and if God helps us, and we will retrieve some, we will evacuate some live victims.
Iran's intelligence minister warned that his country would push for the production of a nuclear weapon if crippling international sanctions on Tehran remain in place.
Our nuclear program is a peaceful one, and in the fatwa by the Supreme Leader explicitly stated that the manufacturing of nuclear weapons is forbidden by the Sharia, and the Islamic Republic won't go after them and consider seeking them as haram. However, if a cat is cornered, it may show a kind of behavior that a free cat would not. If Iran is pushed in that direction, then it wouldn't be Iran's fault, but those who push.
Delegates from the Arab League held an emergency meeting in Cairo on Monday to discuss the Palestinian cause. The meeting comes on the same day that the two key Palestinian factions, Fatah and Hamas, opened talks in Cairo aimed at clearing the first elections of the West Bank and Gaza since 2006. On the agenda are issues such as judicial and security arrangements for the vote and the fate of Palestinian voters in Israeli-occupied East Jerusalem. Fatah has run the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli-occupied West Bank, and Hamas has held power in the Gaza Strip since 2007, the year Israel imposed a devastating blockade on the occupied Palestinian territory.
Egypt continues its full efforts to end Palestinian division and did not hesitate to offer all kinds of support to Palestine and to restore unity. Egypt believes that achieving reconciliation in Palestine will have a positive effect on the ability of the Palestinian people to move on in the negotiation process and achieve its goals.
Settlement activity in East Jerusalem and the West Bank is a serious obstacle to the two-solution state and is an illegal activity against the international legitimacy resolutions at the Security Council Resolution 2234. In addition, the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and the transfer of the embassy to Jerusalem is an illegal work and in defiance of the UN resolution.
And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. You make sure to find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, don't forget to follow us on our social media accounts. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram as well. For TeleSUR English, I am Estefania Bravo. See you next time.